Immigrant Law Center. I'm also an immigration attorney. I still maintain a caseload. I've only been director of policy for a little over a year now. And before we begin the presentation, I think it is important to just share about myself and what brought me to the work, and as like the foundation of why I do what I do, and why many of us in the organization do what we do. Um, New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, we are really proud to be what we call as like a social justice organization providing direct legal services. And many of us come from the community. So I have a really proud of the intersection that I hold. My mother, she immigrated from Michoacan, Mexico in the 1980s. She came to this country undocumented. She endured a lot to come here. And I don't forget her sacrifices. And um, my career was full circle because I was able to help my mom become a citizen last year in November. So the irony of that, in November, my mom became a citizen after 4 years in this country. Um, and so I'm really proud to have helped my mom through that. And that was probably one of the most meaningful moments in my career as an attorney. Um, my father, his family is from New Mexico for generations, since time immemorial. We're an old Hispanic family from my fraternal side, but also proud to be Apache. We also share a lot of other indigenous bloodline within that, but we are Chihenne Apaches. We are not recognized under federal law, but we still maintain our culture and traditions because we understand that being indigenous is not necessarily whether or not you're defined under the law. It is cultural. It is our identity. And so I really wear that proudly, have grown up in New Mexico pretty much my entire life. I was born in California, but raised in New Mexico since I was about 1.5. So I'm really proud to be from here. I grew up in northern New Mexico in Springer, which is a really small town in the northern part of the state. And then we moved to Las Cruces, and most of my life I spent on the border, upon which I became a volunteer in community with the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, the oldest and largest Latino organization in the country, working on civil rights issues, primarily focusing on immigrant rights. And so understanding that I had a privilege being born in this country was really hard to conceptualize growing up in a mixed status family, having some family members who to this day do remain undocumented across this country. It was really hard for me to understand that. And so I got involved at a really early age. So I was about 13 years old, volunteering, and I have volunteered ever since. So organizations like this are really near and dear to me because I grew up volunteering. And then I graduated from UNM School of Law in 2021. I did go to law school a little bit later. I had a whole career as an organizer, as a legal secretary, and became a national civil rights leader across the country with LULAC. I was elected to the national board at 16 years old, and I served on the board for about 3.5 years. And I became the youngest elected state director of the organization, and we worked on the DREAM Act. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful, but my career and trajectory led me to become an immigration attorney. At New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, we're really proud that our mission is to advance justice and equity by empowering low-income immigrant communities through collaborative legal services, advocacy, and education. So our organization, when we think of immigration law is extremely complex. It is one of the hardest areas of law because it changes constantly. We have to be on top of our stuff consistently. And so for the sake of time and also just to distill it down, we think of the pool of immigration law. Most people think of it, look as a pie. So for immigration practitioners, if you're looking at a pie chart, about 80% of that would be family-based petitions. So if you are married to a U.S. citizen, if you are a child of a U.S. citizen, a real close blood relation. So think of the analogy blood, sweat, and tears. So the bloodline, 80% of immigration law will be taken up by that pool of immigration forms of relief. Mexico Immigrant Law Center does not do family-based petitions, and I'll explain why in a minute. We obviously are educated to do those, but we had to figure out our main mission based on what was, I guess, emergency-based cases. So then we go into the next, we think of SWET. SWET is your worker-based visas. Workers-based visas make up maybe even a smaller percentage. We're looking at like maybe 10%, maybe. In New Mexico, it's even smaller than that because we don't have a whole lot of tech companies here. So we think of that as some of the main ones. There are some specialty visas. There are some nuances there. It can be a little bit more difficult. That is primarily done by a lot of private immigration pros. We do not tap into that either. And then the rest of the pie, think of it as tiers. It's a really small percentage, but it is one of the most critical. And tiers is all humanitarian-based claims, which is what NMILC is an expert in. Our office consists of various teams in the humanitarian-based claims. One of our main teams is the children's team, which I came from that team before I transitioned to my current role. The children's team primarily focuses on special immigrant juvenile status visas, which is a visa that is given to children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. So think of an unaccompanied child. Many people have seen unaccompanied children being put in facilities. Many children who have crossed without parent. Those are a prime example of what we do. We are constantly working with some of the most vulnerable children you could imagine, some of the hardest cases. We do them. And then there's some other visas that we can also do, but primarily we focus on that one because there is an age-out deadline. So under this particular area of law, it's a very niche area of law. I'm an expert in this area of law for the state of New Mexico. We basically have to get a state court order from a state court in New Mexico that says that this child has been either abused, abandoned, or neglected. And we can get this through a guardianship petition, through a family custody petition, through various other declaratory judgments. That is then taken as evidence that for them to then apply for the visa through USCIS, which is a federal agency that grants the status. When usually in the past, so it's a two-step process. The third step is really once they obtain the status, depending on the age, they also were able to get they're also able to get a work permit, and they're able to get a social security number, qualify for Medicaid, get some stability, and then by holding they eventually will hold a green card depending on what country they come from, where they can adjust status to get a green card. We have to keep track of like the visa calendar to then see what we can apply, when we can apply for this form of relief. Once they get a green card, if they carry that for 5 years, then they become a citizen. So it's an actual pathway to citizenship. It's a very important area of law. In New Mexico, in 2020, before 2023, we were only able to get this visa for children up to the age of 18. Under federal law, it can go up to the age of 21, so long as the state law permits. So it's based on your state court jurisdiction. It's based on some nuances. Some states have up to the age of 21. So when I became an attorney at New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, I was a fellow first, and as a fellow, my fellowship project was to work in rural communities to try to figure out how many children qualify for this form of relief and help them before they aged out. There are very few immigration attorneys in this state. We're a really small section of the same bar. So imagine there are very few of us, and then even fewer in the rural communities, and a lot of rural communities are then falling between the cracks. A lot of these kids were aging out of the process without realizing they actually qualified for this form of relief. And because of that, I was going out and doing research, doing outreach, and I found that there were a lot of students that would come to us at 18 years old, maybe a week after their 18th birthday, discovering that they were undocumented. Many didn't realize. Some realized that they wanted to figure out a pathway, and unfortunately their only pathway was this option, but they now had aged out of the process. Whereas their younger sibling were able to apply for this form of relief, get some stability, and no longer fear deportation. The older sibling remained in limbo, and there was absolutely nothing we could do. Talked to my boss about it, and she was like, and I said, well, can we just change the law? She's like, well, it's really hard to do. In New Mexico, it takes about 6 sessions to pass a law. And we have a short session. We're the last volunteer legislature in the country. So it's either 30 or 60-day session. And we were like, I was approaching a 60-day session. This was fall. No, yeah. And I'm almost approaching the winter of 22. And I was like, well, can we do something? Because there's people aging out, and it's just a quick, easy fix if we just get enough votes. And she was like, well, because of our our wait list, because we offer our services completely for free if people qualify. It's based on income, and we have huge wait lists. We are really understaffed, and so they're like, there's like no time to do it. And they were like, plus a lot of us get our funding through grants, and so we have to meet our deliverables. And so my boss was like, well, you're a fellow, you don't have the same constraints that we do. Maybe you can go and change the law. So I was a new fresh attorney, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I met with clients. I met with people who had already missed the deadline. We did listening sessions within our community. And through those listening sessions, we discovered that there were more gaps than just aligning the law to the federal statute to up to 21. What does it mean to be abandoned under state law? Does it mean if your parent's dead, is that abandonment? We could argue it, but it wasn't always successful. If your parents deported, is that abandonment under state law? Does that meet the criteria? Who were like, maybe, maybe not. So I decided, why don't we define it ourselves? So we drafted the bill. I asked community members, I asked people who were impacted, if I have to make any sort of agreement at the legislature, what is it that you can live with and what is it that you won't be happy with? Because even though I'm a legal expert, I'm not the true expert. The true experts are those that are impacted. So I wanted to have a plan as to how I was going to go about it. And needless to say, there were three of us, a team of three, went up to the roundhouse. I had to assert myself as an attorney because most people wouldn't open the door for me. People assumed I was younger than I am. And I'm like, no, I'm like in my 30s. I'm not like fresh out of law, so I'm like trying to assert myself here to prove that we need to pass this law. It was three women of color. We were all working to pass this. We brought people from the community. We organized. We sort of hit under the radar at the right time. It started off as a Senate bill. And I don't know if I can, next slide. So that kind of gives you an idea of like, how the policy, we were talking about organizing the bill power. So here at this moment, I can kind of take a moment before I tell you the rest of the story because it goes into it. But we were talking about how we were going to build power because we weren't taken seriously. We were trying to pass this law. So we were talking about what power meant. Power involves a sense of purpose or attention. Community organizing principles about people, power, and change. Building power in communities starts with people and relationships. Coming from New Mexico, I understand that the political landscape here is very different than anywhere else in the country. Relationships mean everything here. Growing up in the north and growing up in the south and then living in the central part of the state, I had the foresight to know how rural community thinks, what different areas are like, going up and talking to people, not pretentious, just going and just saying what we needed, and building relationships with key legislators, building relationships with impacted community, focusing on making sure that those that were giving public comment were from the actual community so that it could shift the power dynamic, that we were now be taken seriously as the experts in our field. Organizing focuses on power, who has it, who doesn't, at the time we did not have it, and how to build enough to shift the power relationships and bring about change. Collaboration is one of our biggest mottos. And essentially, we created a movement to build this transformative change because we were ultimately able to pass this law. It started off as a sit-in bill, and we met some resistance by a key legislator. I won't name since I'm being reported. And so we were like, okay, this bill's not going to pass. They were like, sorry, the bill's dead. He's not going to hear the bill. There's other bills that have taken precedence over this bill, so your bill's done. And so I won't say what tactics I used, but I demanded to know, well, what will he hear? Well, he's like, well, he's going to move on to House bill starting tomorrow. I was like, so there's still a chance. You just got to change the House bill. They're like, good luck. There's no way at this point. The filing deadline's over. And I'm like, there has to be a way. There always is. It's just, who do you know? Back to the idea of change, who has the power. We spoke to the Speaker of the House, Javier Martínez, who then created the concept of, well, this concept already existed. It was called a dummy bill, which is bills in reserve that have a number. And in a case of an emergency, we use that. He resurrected the bill by creating House Bill 15, and we became a House bill. We went through the House. We passed unanimously through the House. We passed unanimously through the committees and then the House. floor. Then we came back to the Senate. We installed in one of the Senate committees again, and we're like, we're back, and we did it. We are now a House bill, and our bill became a political pawn at the very end. It was very difficult. Our bill was finally put on the agenda, and then as soon as it was our turn to go up, the chair was like, you know what? We're not going to hear your bill. I'm like, here we are, 2 days left in the session. We're so close, so close. And at that point, I'm like, what do? We shift the power. We talk to the floor leader. We talk to the pro tem. We basically pray and like do everything we can at this point. I was like, I'm borderline ready to dress as a nun. What do we need to do to get this bill across? And so everyone was like just pushing all of our efforts. The community came out in full force. Every single call that came from community was impacting the secretaries. Like, okay, there's like thousands of calls coming in for this one bill. He finally gets the hearing, and he grills me for like nearly an hour, which is really uncommon in these committee hearings. And I'm the sole expert on this bill. We passed the bill. We passed through the committee. He doesn't turn in the report. By technicality, if you don't turn in the report, your bill is not going to the floor. So here we are. We're a political pawn. The very last day of the session, legislative session ends exactly at noon. If you don't pass your bill's dead. By noon, it's dead. Also, the last day of session is typically filibuster day. So how are you going to get through a filibuster? It's already 9:30. This bill's not turned in. Basically, everyone was like, tell your team, you did everything you could. I'm like talking to the speaker, like, is there no hope? He's like, well, maybe. Like, he's trying everything he can. Like, Senate leadership's trying everything they can. The bill gets turned in around 10 a.m. Get the look, like you got to hit the floor, get ready to be called as an expert on the floor, where you just spoon feeding like the responses to your senator and hope that your senator articulates them effectively. And we're going through the filibuster, and I'm like, I'm not seeing our way out of it. Somehow, something is done. The Senate leadership is able to negotiate something with the Republicans. Our bill passes, only 6 vote in opposition, and the bill is signed into law in April of 2023, and it had an emergency clause, so it took effect immediately. So now this law has created a lot of change, because now your immigrant children not only qualify up to age 21, but now based on what's happening today, the immigrant children who have parents deported will now qualify for this sort of relief to have protection in Mexico. Now our state has the most progressive law on the books because we wrote it ourselves. And on top of all of that, there's, I don't know if many of you know, because the immigration law is obviously very divisive right now, and there's a lot going on in the media. But one thing I don't think many people fully know is that the unaccompanied children funding, there was a whole organization that was federal organization that would allocate this funding to organizations across the country to help unaccompanied children. New Mexico Immigrant Law Center is the only organization in New Mexico that receives this funding. We're the biggest nonprofit. We received this funding. The Trump administration removed $2 million from us, which meant, are we going to have to lay off some of our attorneys? Does this mean we're going to have to not be able to serve them? And then on top of all of that, does this mean that we aren't going to be able to help immigrant children in deportation defense proceedings? So I only mentioned that area of law is a state court, it's been a federal process. I didn't mention that we also have to help them in deportation proceedings. And deportation proceedings are really hard because it's really based on who's present. I have never lost the case, and I hope I never do, because that's how scary this can be. It's really based on an administrative procedure. So in New Mexico, we do not have an immigration court. We have to go to El Paso. We have been able to successfully argue in court to ask for webinar hearings because we have clients across the state in rural communities. It would be a lot of money to have them have to drive all the way to El Paso to get their hearing. And so now we're like, not only do we not have $2 million, we've lost $2 million, now we can actually serve them in deportation proceedings. And across the country, there are immigrant children to this day that are 2 years old, 3 years old, and up, that are literally answering questions at court alone with not attorneys. because under law, there is not a requirement to provide an attorney in the administrative processes. So heartbreaking. And here we are. This is what's happening right now. And so luckily, our executive director had the foresight to really fundraise in advance. So we have a cushion of funding for now. But there was a serious concern that we were not going to be able to serve the children. And that is our biggest team. We have other teams too, like you have a victim survivor team. Those are different humanitarian-based visas. We have trafficking victims. That's a T visas. We also work on basically every type of humanitarian claim, asylum. We are entrenched in the detention centers, advocating for immigrants who are detained in civil detention. There are 3 detention centers in New Mexico. One is in Torrance County, one is in Cibola County, and one is in Otero County. Those 3 facilities are now being run without any type of oversight. The Office of Inspector General and the Office of Civil Liberties and Civil Rights used to be the oversight body, which at the end of the day, they weren't really, how do I say this diplomatically? The 3 facilities are very poorly run, even with oversight. Now imagine without it, because the Trump administration did strip the 2 oversight bodies. And so we are literally seeing some of the worst cases. There have been people who have committed suicide in these facilities. There are people that I have witnessed with literally bones sticking out with not having any form of health care. Or there's a case that really haunts me of a young woman a trans woman from Honduras, was exactly my age. She was 34 years old. She came to this country. I think she died in 2023. She was only detained for 14 days in Cibola. She had a life-threatening condition, asked for her medication. She was 80 pounds. They wouldn't provide her the medication. By continuing to advocate for it, asking for an attorney, they put her in solitary confinement. And then she was found unresponsive. And unfortunately, she did pass away. And there's the arguments that are made. We have been trying to pass a bill for 3 years to remove their ability to contract with ICE for the purposes of civil immigration detention. This section was HD9. We're so close. We created a movement, so close to passing this bill. I'm so furious about it. So close. But the argument that was told to me was that, well, these are good jobs. And because we get money, as the counties get this money, we cannot in good faith vote in favor of this bill. And it was really hard for me because on one hand, I understand it's hard, like rural communities are thriving off of this scheme. And I understand that these are jobs, but it becomes down to the question of human life versus income. And the county of Cibola was making 50 cents, maybe 50 cents on average per day per detainee. They made $7 on her debt. $7 was all that she was worth in their eyes. And that was what was really hard for me to conceptualize and hard for our movement to conceptualize. And so we do still realize that we have a lot of power to continue to build. Next slide, please. So our platform this year, we had HB 9, the bill I just talked about, with the Immigrant Safety Act, formerly known as the Dignity Not Detention Bill. The Immigrant Safety Act is a bill that would prohibit the state of New Mexico and local governments from entering into agreements to detain people with federal civil immigration custody. This bill would have closed a loophole that allows ICE and for-profit detention contractors to use New Mexico counties as pass-throughs to avoid normal scrutiny of the disaster safety records. And I told you some of the examples. There's a lot of examples that would haunt you, honestly. And they are currently profiting. These private companies are profiting off of our counties, off of our state. And right now are using New Mexico to grease the wheels for the Trump mass deportation plan. So we have not before there were immigrants that were asylum seekers. So a lot of asylum seekers were those being detained. Right now, they're immigrants from the interior that are being detained because we have not seen a rise in people crossing. And so most of the immigrants now that are being detained are immigrants that have been here for generations, people in our own home here in New Mexico. We're also sending them from across the country to be filled in those beds here in New Mexico. So it's really sad what's happening right now. SB 250 This was a bill that was led by Somos un Pueblo Unido. New Mexico Immigrant Law Center also supported this bill, but I want to give credit to the leads of that bill. Senate Bill 250 is a statewide non-discrimination policy to prevent the use of state and local resources to enforce civil and federal immigration laws. This would prohibit local law enforcement and probation officials from collaborating with ICE to deport New Mexico families. Had this bill passed, okay, so both HB 9 and 250, the most protected bills of the legislative session, did not pass. It was heartbreaking, very heartbreaking to our movement. Had 250 passed, we would have seen a lot more protections where people would feel safe to report crime, we feel safe to go to court, etc. Right now, we're seeing people not wanting to even go out of their houses. There's a lot of fear that if they were to report something or help in any ways, serve as a witness in a crime, that they are going to get deported because ICE is literally going door to door. And so we're also, Curry County is the county that has now signed a 287G agreement, so they collaborate with law enforcement is collaborating with ICE. So that would have prevented that agreement from existing. Unfortunately, that now is in existence. HB 9, had it passed, we would no longer see the contracts for civil immigration detention. It wouldn't have solved the problem in its entirety because there is still a criminal wing, but it would have been a very important incremental step. Right now, there's nothing being done. If anything, now we're actually overcrowding. And on top of that, there's going to be another facility in Lee County. And then we also heard that Fort Bliss will now be used potentially as well. Pretty much any day now, we're going to be seeing people detained in Fort Bliss. And then SB 36, the Privacy and Non-Disclosure of Sensitive Information and Data Bill. That bill, essentially, the Motor Vehicle Department was selling all of our information to third-party sellers like LexisNexis, who then turned around and sold that information to ICE, subjecting undocumented immigrants and their families to deportation, potentially putting out all of their information. We wanted to stop this from happening across agencies, and so this was led by Somos un Pueblo Unido. We supported this bill, spoke in favor of it, helped them as well, and it is now signed into law. So that is one successful bill that we were able to get across. One success is still an important one. It's still heartbreaking we didn't get those other two, though. Next slide, please.
Sure. I have a question. Where do the contractors come from that run the detention centers? Are they national? Or are they New Mexico companies? Or where do those people, how do they show up in New Mexico and where they from?
Yeah, so these are major corporations. But you say label them as national corporations. So think of Core Civic, one of the biggest in the country. They have contracts across the country. Our county is contract County of Torrance and the county, I believe, of Otero contracts with Core Civic. And so that's a contract directly with those counties. And those counties, they don't have any ability of oversight. They have no ability to make any sort of assertion whatsoever that's under the purview of the federal government. So ICE and this private company are basically running these facilities. They're only using our counties as pass-throughs to avoid procurement procedures. And so it's really a terrible scheme how this works. And then the other company is MTC, which I now forgot what it stands for. But MTC is another major corporation, and they run Sigula. And so
Are these also companies that run for-profit prisons across the country? I mean, is that also part of their business?
It's all a for-profit model. And so in the example of, like, when I said asylum seekers, under law, like, ICE has discretion. They don't have to put them in detention. They can choose to let them await their hearing on the adjudication of their claim, because there's two different kind of nuance. So they can wait for the adjudication of their claim or go to court, depending on which type of proceeding they're under. They can wait for it on the outside. But because of the way this model works, some of them are put in detention because they want to make money off these people. It's exploiting them. So there literally would be cases of siblings, exact same fact pattern. One who's awaiting for the adjudication of their claim of a sponsoring family or with a family member. They are able to, at least go through their process, get through process. Oftentimes a successful case. The exact same fact pattern sibling who is in detention is deteriorated completely, like left out to dry, and oftentimes they'll self-deport because they don't want to suffer torture, essentially. And so these are like examples where they don't even know what they're signing because they're not giving them access to counsel. So that's happening consistently. And I have heard that the facility in Lee County might be maybe run by Geo Group, which is another for-profit prison company.
And Jessica, what reasons do our legislators here for not supporting court bills like HB 9 and Senate 03?
There's so many different reasons. I think some legislators that live in those particular counties are afraid that the public, their constituents, will be pissed at them because they generate money from these facilities being lit. There is tax revenue. There's a lot of, they generate money. So they don't want to lose this income and they don't want to upset constituents that potentially work there. However, we have found that depending on the facility, a lot of the people that actually work in the facilities are not local. So the argument kind of dies there. But I mean, it again, it comes down
to... Is this
to
what they voice in the House or in the Senate, or is this the back buzz that goes on DMI?
a bit of both.
How they speak in public, what do they say, like in the House or in...
A lot, oftentimes, I mean, it depends. I mean, every year it's different, but consistently I have heard this from people when I go lobby door to door to each of them. We've heard this from some people on the actual floor, a lot of times on the floor. It was just racist nonsense, blaming immigrants for crime, blaming immigrants for STDs, like just throwing out outlandish things, just using scare tactics to get people to not go for the bill. So it's kind of a mixed bag of things. A lot of it's xenophobia, like it's just in general, they hear immigrant and they assume immigrants are criminals. There's like no way to escape that in some of these, and across the country, we can't escape the good versus bad immigrant narrative. And like, we're constantly as practitioners having to argue, value, or like the immigrants' value. It has to be based on the economy, their contributions to the economy, their contributions to this, contributions to that, which again, it's like, for me, it's really difficult because it shouldn't be based on that. It should just be based on the fact people are human and deserve dignity. But like the audience itself, like know your audience, and that audience is not going to go for, a lot of these like value-based arguments, which is unfortunate. So trying to stay true to our values while also understanding that we're trying to address xenophobia, racism, and all these underlying issues that exist in the legislative body.
So, Jessica, do you anticipate a lot of... I'm a naturalized citizen. I'm from Ireland. I came to the United States in 1983, and I never thought that I would have to worry again about my status in the United States. But more and more, I'm hearing from this administration that they will, for any reason, deport you, whether you're a naturalized citizen or not. And are you seeing any of that in our state?
Yes, I mean, early on, even in the legislative session, ICE put out a press release basically saying that they had deported without due process a lot of people from our communities. I think it was like 40. And they even in their own press release said that over half of them did not have any criminal record, and we had no knowledge of who they were. It's possible that they may have qualified for a form of relief or had a form of status. And so we had to do a lot of investigating to figure this out. So that was happening even during the legislative session when we were trying to even use that to like a press conference to say like, we need to do something because you're already saying it happening cross country. It's going to happen here. We have seen people in our community who have special immigrant juvenile status, the area that I specialize in. Some of my clients have had, Homeland Security investigation officers show up to their door unannounced, unprovoked, claiming to use it under the guise of a welfare check. And my concern was just don't open the door because, I mean, they can go through me as your attorney as a welfare check. They shouldn't go to you and cause this fear. These are children who have endured unimaginable forms of trauma. I mean, I had clients that have nearly died. Their whole families were shot for. Like, it's terrible. And they had a work permit. They had status of that. They had something called deferred action. It's not the same thing as DACA. It's a different type of deferred action that will grant them this ability against deportation while they wait for their green card. And so they had a form of status, and they were visiting their homes, and our fear was they're probably going to end up trying to deport our clients who have status. We have seen cases of people that have green cards that, based on just having an accent, were singled out, potentially detained. I haven't seen any of my particular clients with green cards get detained, but we did even yesterday hear about clients in other organizations and other private firms that were detained and put in facilities. We have heard of a DACA recipient who had a status to remain here in this country, temporary but still a status, and they were flying in and out of El Paso airport to somewhere else I don't know exactly what state they were flying to, but they were going to remain here in the United States. They were just flying for work. They were detained and put in a detention center. Did not get proper due process, did not have access to an attorney, and we're seeing these trends. Even for my own mother, who is now a naturalized citizen, I fear. I tell her not to come see me in Albuquerque. I'll go see her just because she has a very thick accent and will speak English well. And in good faith, I can't tell her, you know what, just because you have status doesn't mean you're safe. And that's a really hard thing for me to even say as an attorney. But it is the reality that we live in, is we're not playing with people that are playing by the rules and by the law. And so, unfortunately, we're constantly having to navigate really unprecedented types of scenarios that we never saw before. Yeah, and the issues continue to escalate as we learn more and more every day. We had some workforce equity proposals. These ones, HB 64, this amended the non-discrimination policy to help basically adult workers in SIJ youth. That did not pass. We also had SB 177, the U Visa Certification Act, which our organization led this bill. Unfortunately, also did not pass. This would have established a uniformity within the state to obtain a U Visa certification. U Visas are to help impacted victims qualify for this particular visa. And a prerequisite of obtaining that is to get a certification from law enforcement saying that they were helpful in the investigation or prosecution of a crime. And we have some really good examples of law enforcement officers that will give those certifications, where we have very conservative districts in the state that are refusing to give the certifications at all. To obtain a U visa under current trends is a 10-year process. So that would elongate this even further. And so it's a very difficult visa to get. But as they're stalling that process, it makes it much more difficult for that family to adjust status. And so we were trying to pass this bill to help survivors of crime, essentially. And then we'll keep taking it up until it passes. And then the last thing was, because of the urgency happening across the country, the demands for our services, we don't have enough attorneys. We don't have enough resources and funding. We did everything we could to address this with the state legislature, and they were able to, through like a secret channels, and we're able to add about $10 million for direct legal services for immigrant services across the state. So we'll be getting a sliver of that portion of funding. It was a huge win for us because now we at least can survive and probably, hire more attorneys to do this work. And then other advocacy organizations can then do pro se services and help more immigrants figure out like their next steps. And also getting volunteers at the detention facilities to continue to help serve as many immigrants as possible with the many issues that are currently happening. So that was one of our biggest victories. And then next slide, please. This is some pictures of our Immigrant Day of Action. We always hold a really big Immigrant Day of Action. This year we had a really, really huge one. It was unprecedented. I don't even remember we had some thousands of people that showed up walking to Santa Fe. I will play this, but this was when we passed the Special Juvenile Classification Act a couple of years ago. Like, it was a very emotional day. because everyone said this bill would not pass. And it like, I believe that if you positively manifest all of your positivity to make something happen, it can happen no matter what people say. And like, this was a perfect example of like we left no stone unturned, and like every person of power we could possibly reach was tapped in. And so when the bill passed, there were people like cheering, which was not allowed upstairs. And there were people running from the other chamber, like celebrating with us, like legislative staff, analysts, the speaker himself ran across. All these different legislators from the House came, and it was like a really beautiful moment because it shows that anything can happen. People needed it.
I heard in New York, House Street is such big. How a 50 as they did the legal society says you are.
I guess it's a short. Our lead sponsor was crying because we didn't think it was going to happen. I was crying too. I was a mess. I didn't even call him down the stairs. But yeah, it was a very beautiful day, and there were people just running in the halls, embracing. You can't really feel it all from this cliff, but a lot was happening around. And then we just continued to organize. Like, I mean, this was part of like when I left the chamber, and some of the impacted community was there, like realizing they now would qualify for this form of relief. So it was a really huge victory. If you notice, I said that we used to call the dignity not detention bill the detention bill, as dignity not detention. We were finding that that national framework was not really driving with the legislative body. So what was the core of our message was that immigrants deserve safety and they should not be treated the way they've been treated. And so we changed with the help of comm specialists and the speaker of the House, that it now became known as the Immigrant Safety Act, which will be continue to use that branding moving forward. If you haven't heard, the governor recently came out and said that she is going to put this on the call for special session. So if there is a special session in the next couple of months, this bill will come up again. And we are shocked that we were even on the call. But I think it's a testament to our movement that it's growing and it's time to pass this bill. So I'm feeling very, very optimistic. And we're just using all of our tactics to try to address all the issues about representation, trying to do things in the press, every which way, email campaigns, phone campaigns, coalition building. Our coalition has grown with organizations that are not even immigrant-based organizations anymore, because we know that it's going to take all of us to be able to create systemic change. Next slide, please. This year I was talking about that ICE press release. We did a press conference in opposition. All of the organizations across the state that work with immigrants, we held a press conference in the Roundhouse, calling for action. This is me hugging Becca Sheff, one of the most incredible legal minds I've ever worked with. She is an attorney at ACLU, New Mexico. Her and I were legal experts on the detention bill, the Immigrant Safety Act. Had just passed for the very first time ever. We had passed the House of Representatives with this bill. We'd never passed in any chamber. We were able to pass the House, which is why I say we're so close. We were not able to go before the Senate. The Senate didn't hear us. So we don't know if we would have actually passed that bill. We just have a theory that we would have passed by one vote. And so this is just saying, like, these are some of the tactics that we use. We try to be creative, flexible. We know our audience. We do public hearings, voter education, and conversations like this are critical because it helps us create a larger body of people to make calls in favor of these bills that we're trying to bring forward. The calls that you all make actually really do impact this bill. Even giving public comments, whether it's online or in person, it makes a difference. So we've found that these talks really help our movement really grow. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. And even though majority of our platform we lost technically, we don't see them as losses in the same way, and we define success in so many different ways. And something that I really took from this legislative session is that our movement has grown substantially. We have seen so many people call in support of our movement, so many people coming in support in person, giving public comment, and seeing how much it's grown. Even I think John Oliver even gave us a shout out that same time we were out there, saying that we need, like, New Mexico is looking at a bill to to stop the ability to contract with ICE for the purposes of civil detention. Like, that was huge. So it's made a national movement. And that's something we're really proud of, is that we did everything. It wasn't for lack of trying on our part. It was based on the lack of leadership of the Senate to push it forward. The House did their part by making sure that it passed. I have a lot of faith in a lot of the Senate leadership because they have really helped us in the past. And I believe if we would have given the opportunity to get through Senate Judiciary and I on the Senate floor, we would have passed. So yeah, I still find it successful nonetheless. And just thank you so much for your time. And really go quiet for all of you.
I have one other quick question. Is immigration law taught in law school?
Not every law school teaches it. It's usually like an elective. I can tell you what I actually took one immigration law class in law school. It was advanced immigration law. I did not take the pre-reg for it, but there's like some at the University of New Mexico School of Law. There's maybe a couple of classes, but it's not heavily taught. No, it's not. It's not even put on the bar exam, so it's not like a main area of. I guess like it's not doctrinal to the teaching of law.
Where do we go to find out information like the immigrant day? Like when's the next one of those, or like, what websites we go to get those sort of events and coordination?
Yeah, honestly, I think we need all of our immigration organizations need to do a better job of posting on our website. It's always like after the fact. A lot of times this happens mostly through word of mouth. Unfortunately, it's not the best, but you can also see like announcements on our social media, so Facebook and Instagram. NMLC will post about it, and also like Somos will post about it. A lot of times Somos will lead it and we follow with them. They've been doing this for 30 years, and so we really follow a lot of their leadership. And Centro de Igualdad de Derechos is another core organization we partner with in Albuquerque, and we all partner up to do Immigrant Day of Action. Immigrant Day of Action is usually in the early to midpoint of the legislative session. So either end of January, mid to mid February is usually when we do it, as a way to like push the momentum forward for our platform. So that's around that time. We might enter a special session either at the end of August or early September, maybe mid-September. I'm hopeful that it's early September so we could just kind of see what happens. I'm not sure if it's going to be a multi-day special session, but usually with that, it's possible we may hold press conferences. It's possible we might have smaller rallies to like build momentum. I'm not sure yet because we're still just discovered we're going to possibly be on the call. But usually anytime we have any sort of legislative process happening, we will try to organize something.
What's the best way to support? Is it like cash donation, volunteering our time?
All of it. So anything that people don't have the time to give, certainly donations are critically helpful right now. It's more than ever. We are seeing loss in funding left and right, because even with that $10 billion, again, that's going to get spread out across the state, and it's a one-time funding, and that's it. And so, yeah, funding is critical, but even like making calls in support of our efforts, there's a huge help. Writing letters or emails to legislators asking to support this legislation, especially for legislators in your district. Showing up to our events, supporting a community, possibly if you speak Spanish, volunteering to help us with translations, volunteering to go to the detention centers and help, take accounts of what's happening in these facilities. There's also like volunteers, an organization called BIDA that does volunteer work in the detention centers, and they may have opportunities that's not necessarily Spanish related, but they do go to the detention facilities and help provide their rights presentations, do all these different sorts of things. So there's just different types of ways to volunteer for the organizations and workers.
And one last question. How many different countries are you seeing in Mexico? Are you seeing, well, for immigration, is there just like every country in the world this year and there goes like immigration, or is it just, more Spanish-speaking cultures?
Majority are from Spanish-speaking countries. but we don't, it's not just Spanish speaking, it's just the majority. We've seen from all over Philly. In my practice, from my own experience, majority of my clients are from Central America, Mexico, and South America.
All right, I'm gonna close out our meeting just because we're running late. But if Jessica has time to hang out, we can sit and chat after that.